Ladies and gentlemen, today's speech trumps message to Iran: power play or path to peace. We live in a world where headlines shape perception and perception shapes reality. One statement, one tweet, one message, especially when delivered by a world leader, can ripple through economies, affect lives, and even tilt the balance between war and peace. So, let's talk about Donald Trump's message to Iran. Was it a display of dominance, a threat veiled as diplomacy, or was it something deeper? Was it a message that, underneath its bravado, carried a strategic attempt to lead the world toward a different kind of conversation? Because here's what I believe: everything a leader does, especially in moments of tension, reveals their true values, and the way Trump spoke to Iran wasn't just about missiles or military might. It was about influence. It was about identity, it was about legacy, but let's zoom out. Let's start with why. Why would a leader like Donald Trump speak in a language so bold, so direct, so confrontational? The answer is simple, yet profound: because certainty is power in times of chaos. When the world is uncertain, when threats are rising, when nations are teetering between retaliation and diplomacy, people crave clarity. And Trump, like him or not, gave them that. In times of uncertainty, what people crave the most is not comfort or even reassurance, it's clarity. When emotions run high and the future feels unstable, we look to leaders not for all the answers, but for a sense of direction. Donald Trump's message to Iran, while bold and controversial, delivered something that often goes missing in high-stakes international conflict: a clear stance. It wasn't vague. It wasn't filled with diplomatic ambiguity. It was precise, firm, and unmistakable. And whether one agrees or disagrees with his approach, one cannot deny that clarity is a fundamental tool in any leader's arsenal. In leadership, clarity builds confidence. It signals to both allies and adversaries that there is a vision, that there are boundaries, and that those boundaries matter. When leaders waver, when they overthink or try too hard to please everyone, confusion sets in, and confusion is dangerous. It creates room for misinterpretation, for fear, and even for conflict. On the other hand, when a leader speaks clearly and decisively, people know what to expect. Even opponents, though they may not like what's being said, are forced to take notice and adjust their behavior accordingly. Trump's message to Iran did exactly that. It wasn't about pleasing the global audience. It was about removing any doubt about where the United States stood in that moment. That kind of communication isn't just political, it's strategic. Because when clarity enters the conversation, uncertainty begins to dissolve. And that's where real dialogue can begin, not from a place of guessing, but from a place of knowing. Great leaders, whether in politics, business, or life, understand this deeply. They don't speak to manipulate emotions. They speak to define the environment. And by doing so, they earn trust, not because everyone agrees with them, but because people trust those who stand for something. Clarity then becomes more than a message. It becomes a form of leadership. In a world full of noise, a clear voice cuts through. It invites others to think, to respond, and to engage, not out of fear, but out of understanding. That's the true power of clarity, and it's why, in that moment, Trump's message meant more than just words. It became a signal of leadership in a world struggling to find its way. Power is often misunderstood. We tend to see it as a tool for dominance, a means to assert control over others. But real power, especially in leadership, is not about intimidation. It's about setting boundaries. When Donald Trump addressed Iran with a firm and unapologetic tone, many saw it as a threat. Yet, if we look deeper, it may have been a strategic boundary, a way of saying, this far, no further. And that is a form of leadership we don't talk about enough. In both personal and political relationships, boundaries are essential. They define what is acceptable, what is non-negotiable, and what values are being protected. Without boundaries, chaos creeps in. People test limits, situations escalate, and misunderstandings grow. Leaders who fail to establish these boundaries create environments where uncertainty thrives. But when a leader draws a clear line, especially in high-stakes scenarios, they're not just showing strength, they're protecting peace. Think of it like this: when a parent firmly tells a child not to touch a hot stove, it's not out of anger, it's out of care. The boundary is firm, not to hurt the child, but to protect them from something worse. In the same way, Trump's hardline message to Iran might have been framed with force, but the intention may have been to prevent something far more destructive. This is where leadership becomes nuanced. It's not just about what is said, but why it's said and how it's intended to shape behavior. Trump's message wasn't just to Iran, it was to the world. It was a public declaration that certain actions would not go unanswered, that there were consequences to aggression. That kind of clarity can actually deter violence rather than incite it. We don't often associate strong words with peace, but the truth is, sometimes the best way to stop conflict is to make the cost of conflict unmistakably clear. When power is used with intention, it doesn't provoke, it protects. It sets the tone. It defines the rules of engagement. And in a world filled with blurred lines and shifting loyalties, those who draw firm lines, those who use power to create order rather than fear, are often the ones who keep the peace, even when it doesn't look like peace at first glance. Peace is often misunderstood as silence, the absence of conflict, or a gentle handshake between two sides. But real peace is not passive, it's active. It is built on values, maintained through boundaries, and protected by principles. When Donald Trump delivered his message to Iran, many heard aggression. But beneath the surface, it revealed a deeper idea: that peace without principles is fragile and often an illusion. It's not enough to simply hope for peace. Leaders must define what they will and will not accept in order to preserve it. Leadership is not about avoiding tension. It's about managing it with clarity. When a leader makes it clear that certain behaviors cross the line, they aren't rejecting peace. They are standing up for it. True peace is not kept by staying quiet in the face of danger. It is kept by having the courage to defend what's right, even when it's difficult. Trump's message to Iran could be seen as an expression of that courage. A firm statement that certain actions would not go unchallenged, not because war is desirable, but because allowing unchecked aggression would lead to something worse. In any organization, community, or nation, peace comes from having a clear set of values and the strength to uphold them. Imagine a company that lets unethical behavior slide just to avoid internal conflict. Sooner or later, that lack of principles destroys the culture. It's the same in international relations. When leaders fail to speak up or draw a line, they send a message that bad behavior will be tolerated, and that tolerance, over time, becomes a threat to everyone. Trump's strong language may have been a signal, a way of saying, we value peace, but not at the cost of integrity. Because peace built on fear is temporary. Peace built on silence is weak. But peace built on clear expectations, accountability, and strength, that's the kind of peace that lasts. And while it may not look calm or comfortable in the moment, it creates stability in the long run. This kind of leadership isn't always popular. It doesn't always sound diplomatic, but it sends a powerful message that we're not just avoiding war, we're protecting something more important. Not just peace itself, but the principles that make peace worth having. Courage in leadership is not measured by popularity. It's measured by the willingness to stand firm when it's easier to stay silent. In times of global tension, like the conflict between the United States and Iran, the safest choice for most leaders would be to issue carefully worded statements, full of neutrality and diplomatic softness. But leadership isn't about playing it safe. It's about taking responsibility for drawing the line, even when the world is watching and judgment is guaranteed. When Donald Trump delivered his message to Iran, it wasn't universally applauded. In fact, it stirred controversy, but it demonstrated one of the most essential traits of leadership, the courage to be decisive. When leaders avoid being clear, they may protect themselves from criticism in the short term, but they leave everyone else in confusion. People don't follow uncertainty, they follow vision, and vision requires courage. It takes bravery to say what needs to be said, especially when it might not be well received. Trump's message may not have been polished, but it was unmistakably clear. That clarity came from conviction, and conviction, when rooted in purpose, is a powerful guide. Think of any great leader in history. Those who made an impact weren't the ones who tried to please everyone. They were the ones who stood for something, often alone, often under pressure, and often before the rest of the world understood their motives. Courageous leadership is about stepping forward when everyone else is waiting to see who will move first. It's about being willing to take a risk for the sake of a larger principle: security, integrity, or peace. That kind of courage often looks like confrontation. It looks like strength. It sounds bold, but the intention behind it is what matters most. When a leader's words are driven not by ego, but by the desire to protect, to prevent further harm, to create order in the chaos, then even a hard message can carry the seeds of peace. Trump's message to Iran, for all its intensity, challenged the status quo of hesitation. It forced attention, drew boundaries, and reminded the world that true leadership is not afraid of discomfort. Because progress, clarity, and ultimately peace don't come from staying quiet. They come from having the courage to speak, especially when the stakes are highest.